What's going on, ladies, gents, and kids of all ages? It is Eric coming back at you once again from the Nerd Cave, and today, back by popular demand, we have another deck tips video. Very excited to put this out. I do enjoy deck building. It's one of my favorite parts of Lorcana, one of the things that drew me to it. And today we're going to be looking at Blurple. If you missed our last giveaway, we're going to have another giveaway coming very soon. We're pushing up on 1,000 subscribers, and we're going to be giving away a booster box. So thank you so much to the people who have been supporting the channel recently. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump into our deck list. As you could imagine, this deck is playing Sapphire, so it is looking at doing some ramp to kind of focus on having more ink than your opponent. That is a major factor with Sapphire, especially when you're looking at a deck that's not Ruby Sapphire and you don't have the board removal. You want to get ahead on ink as fast as possible and then do what you can with it. So the first card we play in this deck, and some of these may seem like odd choices, so hear me out, is going to be Turnab Bo's Followers. This is a 4 of in the deck. It is going to help you to put that pressure on your opponent early in the game, which can be hugely important when you're talking about characters like Robin Hood, Cinderella, stuff that are going to come out and give you a hard time. Cinderella is an argument for singing and removing it, which is why we're going to look at our next one drop in the deck, which is going to be Nothing to Hide. So this is a great alternative. As you'll see as we go further into this deck, there's a reason I chose Nothing to Hide over something like Popsicle. You can look at your opponent's hand, which can set you up to play around things like Be Prepared or play around some of the removal your opponent might have. Even early game, things like Cinderella. Playing Nothing to Hide and putting no characters out isn't necessarily a feel bad when you're in that Steel Song matchup. So those are the 1-drops for the deck. Like I said, the deck is a little more mid-range, so it only has 7 1-drops. First up in the 2-drop slot, we have 3 1-jump aheads. We're playing 3 instead of 4 because it is non-inkable. I think it's a great card for turn 2, but I think there's an argument for another card that's going to help you ink ramp in the beginning of the game with this deck in particular. And you may have guessed it, but that is 3 Grandma Tala. So Grandma Tala is more useful in this deck than she is typically. You're seeing her removed from things like Ruby Sapphire or Sapphire Steel because she just isn't very aggressive, but purple can help kind of balance that out a little bit with things like Merlin's Crab to be able to give her 4 attack and just come in really hot on turn 3 into something maybe your opponent doesn't expect. They may have something like Mickey Mouse, which is very popular for Ruby Amethyst, or one of the other early drops that has 3 defense, and maybe think you're not going to be able to do anything about it with Grandma Tala, even a 2/2. Maybe they're questing it with something like Robin Hood or Cinderella because they're not worried about you killing it with Grandma Tala. Next thing you know, you drop a Merlin Crab, and your Grandma Tala is stacking for 4, and you're getting that ink off of it. Alternatively, if you just want to, you can sing 1 jump ahead with her going into turn 3, which can definitely throw your opponents off. We do have one more 2-drop in the deck. You may have guessed it. Like I mentioned, we are playing Blurple. So our final 2-drop for this particular deck is going to be Madam Mim Snake. Great for bounce. Isn't necessarily good with Grandma Tala, but she's fantastic with things like Elsa, Gaston, with the Merlin package, and she's also part of the reason we are playing Turnab Bo's Followers in this deck. Sometimes it's just nice to have a 1-cost character that you can bounce if you got something that would otherwise be dead in your hand, like a Mim. And as I mentioned, we are in on 3 Crab for this particular build. The reason for 3 and not 4, there's just a lot of other good cards to fit into this deck, and I feel like 3 is kind of that sweet spot for him. Like I mentioned, he's going to be best with things like Turnab Bo's Followers, Grandma Tala, and Mickey Mouse, things that just don't have a lot of attack. He's going to be able to boost them up and kind of take your opponent by surprise. Then we have a totally necessary staple in purple, especially if you're playing a good amount of 3-drops that can sing this card, or if you're playing something like the Hyper Aggro package and you play Cinderella Ballroom Sensation. She can sing this card on turn 2, which is fantastic. I'm not playing that in this deck, but I do have lots of 3-drops, so Friends on the Other Side is great. You can go ahead and sing it with a character that costs 3 and draw 2 cards. Can't recommend this card enough for Amethyst, but I don't think anybody is not playing it if they're running Amethyst. Then we do have our main source of ink for turn 3 is going to be Mickey Mouse Detective. He is a 1/3 for 3, and when he comes into play, you put the top card of your library into your Inkwell Exerted. Since we aren't necessarily drawing as many cards in the super early stage of the game, we do have a good amount of card draw. But since we aren't necessarily drawing before turn 3 because we aren't playing things like Popsicle, it's great to have something that's going to be able to ink the top card of your deck instead of letting you put another card from your hand into your inkwell. Mickey Mouse is also a 1/3, so typically he's going to be able to get a cheeky quest in early in the game, and he's going to be able to take your opponent by surprise with things like Merlin's Crab when he's attacking for 4. He can also sing Friends on the other side, so he's good for a lot of stuff. 1 Sorcerer Spellbook. The plan is to draw a lot of cards going into mid-game, so I don't want to have a ton of Sorcerer Spellbooks. It's another uninkable, but playing one of them I think can be pretty good. It can let you gain 1 lore in those matchups where your opponent just really can't do anything about it. And we do have 2 Fishbone Quills. If it's not sticking out to anybody by this point, I'm only running 2 Fishbone Quills. I'm not playing Popsicle at all. This is not an item-heavy build, and this may come as a surprise, but I'm not playing Hiram Flaversham. But Fishbone Quill, for anybody who's not familiar, is going to exert and let you put one of the cards from your hand into your inkwell face down. It does come in face down and unexerted, so you can use it immediately when it comes into play. I'm only in on 2 of these because, like I mentioned, my card draw in the early game isn't as significant as builds in things like Sapphire Steel or Sapphire Ruby that are going to be on the Popsicle package. Then we do have another totally necessary card for Madam Mim Fox. Again, she's going to let you bounce the same things. The snake is bouncing back to your hand, but she's going to be a little more aggressive. She's going to have Rush, and she's going to be able to put some damage on some of those early game characters, and even further punish your opponent for doing things like not thinking that you're going to be able to kill something with Mickey or Grandma Tala. Madam Mim comes down and wipes it off the board. Then we do have 3 Merlin Rabbits. This is another example of playing 3 of instead of 4 of because they are uninkable. So we're trying to limit our uninkable count. There is 19 in this deck. This deck does have several cards that will let you ink uninkables, so that does kind of help counteract that amount of uninkables, because most decks, your sweet spot's probably going to be around 15 or 16. When you play this character and when he leaves play, you do get to go ahead and draw a card. Great with the Mim package, just great in general. He draws you 2 cards for 4, and he is another potential option to sing something like Friends on the other side, or even 1 jump ahead. Then we have 4 of the Merlin Goat. Fantastic inkable, 4/3, so he's great for putting some pressure onto your opponent early in the game, as he does have a decent stat line. And if they remove him, you're going to go ahead and just gain 1 lore off of that, leaving the battlefield, and 1 off of it coming into play. So it can kind of help keep the pressure on against those aggro-y decks. Then we have our big legendary. This is the bulk of the cost of the deck in this single card. Belle Strange But Special, about a $22 card. So you're looking at a little over $80 for the playset of 4. That being said, a lot of the other cards in this deck are fairly budget options. We don't necessarily have a ton of big expensive cards. Even things like Elsa Legendary from Chapter 1 is pretty down right now to the point that it's affordable. But Belle Strange But Special, 2 4 for 4. During your turn, it's going to go ahead and let you put another card from your hand into your inkwell face down. That card does go into play, not exerted. Again, like Fishbone Quill, you're going to be able to go ahead and use that ink right away, which is incredible. But the card does have to be inkable, so that's a little bit different than Fishbone Quill, where you can ink uninkable cards. Belle, the card is required to be inkable, and when you have 10 cards in your ink, she's going to get +4 lore, so she quests for 5, so she's a fantastic way to close out games once your opponents use a lot of their removal to deal with some of your other threats that are coming down early. I think that's one of the things Belle struggles with in Sapphire Steel and Sapphire Ruby, particularly in Ruby, is you don't always have a ton of other characters pressuring the board. So when she comes down, you're not always in a favorable board state, whereas in something like this, you have a lot of stuff pressuring the board early. That way, when Belle is coming down into the mid to late game, you might have a little more say in what's going on, and she's not getting removed right away. Then we do have 2 more 4-drops. Like I said, this deck is very mid-range. We do have 3 Queen's Castle. There's definitely an argument for playing McDuck's Manor in this slot over the Queen's Castle. I think McDuck's Manor is great. It does have 2 more willpower, which makes it a little harder to deal with, but the Queen's Castle at 7 is kind of a sweet breaking spot, because unless they're playing something like Maleficent Dragon or Maui, there's not a lot of things that can kind of come in and do a significant amount of damage to us. Obviously, Maleficent Dragon would kill it in 1 hit. Maui needs a friend to be able to take it out, so sometimes you can get this out in a situation where it is going to be favorable, and especially when you're ramping your ink. If you're doing that aggressively pretty early on, you may be able to get it out on a turn where your opponent can't do anything about it right away, and still have ink to put characters into it and start drawing you cards. and it quests for 2 every turn, which is gross. And our last 4-drop, we do have 3 How Far I'll Go. It's not a card I'm seeing everybody play in Sapphire builds, particularly in Blurple, but I think it's being pretty overlooked. It's really good, especially if you're leaning into something that's less Fishbone Quill oriented. It's going to let you look at the top 2 cards of your deck and put one of them into your hand and the other one into the Inkwell face down and exerted. It does come into that Inkwell exerted, but in this deck in particular, we are playing several 4-drops that we're going to be able to go ahead and sing it with. So it's just a good way to kind of jump ahead that ink even a little bit further going into turn 4 or 5, especially if you're hitting something like Grandma Tala or one jump ahead really early in the game, or Fishbone Quill, and you're getting that turn ahead to begin with to get something out to sing it even a little bit sooner. Then it's going to sing, then you're going to get even further ahead, so it's really good. Because this deck is so ink ramp focused, we aren't playing Hades, but we are playing 3 Let It Goes, just in case you have to clean up a character that would be bad to deal with otherwise. There's things in the format now, like Hydra, that you don't want to deal damage to, Prince Eric, that when he's banished, he's going to do bad things, Mufasa, when he's banished, he's going to do bad things. So in that regard, Let It Go is fantastic because it lets you deal with them without it being favorable to your opponent, and it is another card that you can sing. Obviously, we aren't super 5-drop oriented in this deck, but we do play a couple cards that cost more than 5, and we are ramping into a lot of ink, so the possibility to sing Let It Go is definitely there. Then we do have our only 6-drop in the deck, and that is going to be Gaston, Intellectual Powerhouse. He is a shift 4. Obviously, we have no shift target for him in this deck, but when you play this character, look at the top 3 cards of your deck. You may put 1 into your hand and put the rest on the bottom of your deck in any order. So he's going to let you kind of fix your top deck, get rid of some of those uninkables that maybe you don't want, or cards that aren't useful to you in the current situation. And he's going to let you draw a card, and he's going to be a 4/4 that doesn't die to Medusa, and he's going to quest for 3. So really, really good. And then our last and biggest beast in this deck is going to be Elsa, Spirit of Winter. She is an 8-cost 4/6, so again a stat line where she is not going to die to Madame Medusa. And when she comes into play, she's going to go ahead and let you exert 2 of your opponent's characters, and they're going to remain exerted on their turn. So she's going to give you an opportunity to attack in favorably, or to just slow down your opponent while you're able to quest out those last few lore points. You do also have other things to gain lore in this deck passively, even if they remove your field, like Merlin Goat and the Snake package. So there's a real possibility to gain that lore anyway. As you can see, I'm not playing Lucky Dime. I'm not playing an item focused build. This is focused on playing characters and questing, ramping your ink, slowing your opponent down, and just going ahead and taking over the game. It's a lot of fun to play. There's a lot of kind of cool moves you can do in succession with each other. Obviously, it doesn't have a ton of board interaction until you get pretty far in. You're looking at definitely having to knock your opponent's characters out by hitting them, as opposed to anything else. Like I mentioned, we do have those 3 Let It Goes and the 3 Elsas. That's the majority of the board control that you have in the deck. Otherwise, you're just looking at getting guys out, controlling the board through attacking and questing, and making your opponent deal with your guys before you can get so far ahead that they can't do anything about it. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this deck list in the comments below. Definitely let me know what you're thinking. Pretty soon that next giveaway is going to be coming at you, so it's always great to join the conversation and get used to chatting with some of the other folks in the comments. We got a lot of cool people who comment on these videos and share their thoughts on deck lists and their feelings on the meta, and just generally say hey, and it means the world to me. So thank you so much to the people who take the time. Congratulations again to the subscriber who won the playmat in our last video. If you didn't see that video, definitely go check it out. Not only do we give away a playmat, but we talk about how to crack a slab. And if you haven't seen my other deck tips videos, there's a playlist on the channel, so check those out. If you want to support us, definitely check out our Patreon. We did just add the Enchanted Beast proxy, so that is now available to any paid tier. The cheapest tier is $5. There is also a free tier for folks who don't want to buy in. But thank you so much for sticking around to the end. And remember, when you see those toys, video games, and blurpalicious definition decks off in the distance, it is not a mirage. You guys have a great day.